In this video, we're going to look at some different perspectives on asymmetric polarization. Previously, we looked at the United States and how the two parties might be growing further apart and how that polarization might be asymmetric. One party or faction might be staying the same while the other might be getting more extreme. And there was different evidence to support this view. Behavior of the parties, individual members of Congress, and also the voters themselves. But maybe that's not what's going on. Maybe we're seeing something that looks like asymmetric polarization, but there might be other things going on. Here's one perspective. It comes from Hans Noel, who is a parties scholar in America. He studies how parties work and how they're structured. He suggests that maybe there's something else going on. According to Noel, parties are networks. They are coalitions of groups. And so on the Democratic side, there might be different groups that have different goals, but they work together at election time because they do have some things they want that are in common. Same goes on the Republican side. Different groups, different goals, but they work together because they might have interests that overlap. Now, within those networks, the importance will vary. Some of the groups might be more important than others, indicated by the different size circles there. The larger ones would be the more prominent groups at any given time. Now, what happens when the relative prominence or influence within that network changes? We would see different factions, different groups grow in prominence and others might wane. For example, we could see the centrist bloc of the Democratic Party is the dominant one. And what's been happening over the past 10 or so years is that the far right faction of the Republican Party has become more influential. So it's not that the parties themselves have gotten further apart, but rather it's the relative differences within the party that have changed. Democrats have become more influenced by the centrist faction, and the Republicans have become more influenced by the faction that's furthest to the right. And so within the network, the relative influence has changed. That looks like, to us, asymmetric polarization. That's what we perceive, but really it's just the changing balance of power within the parties that's happening. Different argument, published in a 2022 edition of Electoral Studies, talks about issue polarization and issue realignment. Again, we might be observing asymmetric polarization, but there might be something else going on. And this one deals with immigration, and immigration as an issue in political parties in the United States and Great Britain. So, in this perspective, what's happening is that a specific issue might cause voters to change their party allegiance. And typically when that happens on a large scale, we call that a realignment, when certain groups of the electorate shift their preference from one party to a different one. So let's say immigration is a key issue for some voters. And prior to, let's say, the past 15 years, immigration on its own has not been a salient issue across parties. There might be some Republicans with different views on immigration and some Democrats with different views on immigration. But what's happened, according to this research, is that in the United States and in the United Kingdom, parties on the far right have used immigration as their defining issue. And that has caused some of those voters who prefer immigration to shift their preference from the left-leaning parties over to the right side of the political spectrum. And so what that looks to us, it looks like we're seeing a divergence, that asymmetric polarization, but really it's just voters switching their preferences from one side to the other side. So just to recap, we observe a lot of things that seem to indicate one side is getting more extreme than the other. And we looked at different evidence for that previously. Or we could just be observing the impact of something else that's going on. For example, the intra-party dynamics and the relative importance of different factions within each party, or issue-driven realignments. We could see voters shifting their political preferences as different issues, such as immigration, come to prominence.